Hmm. It looks like, according to a leak, the Supreme Court is going to overturn Roe v. Wade, among other things. Interesting. I wonder what the discourse on Twitter is like. That was a terrible, terrible idea. My initial plan for making this video was to go on Twitter and to look up some of the most popular tweets regarding this topic and to discuss them at length. This would have been maybe a 2-hour plus video and probably exceptionally pedantic, and I figure that's not particularly useful for the discourse. Let's just make this short and sweet, and hopefully in under 10 minutes discussion of my position on this. I'll say for summary that I am a pro-life individual for several reasons, and we'll just detail those because I would consider it to be more earnest to discuss why I hold a position as opposed to why others are wrong for holding their positions. Especially because accusing someone of being a hypocrite is not the best way to encroach them on changing their point of view. The first point of discussion, and this is probably going to be a make or break point for whether or not you find anything past this to be reasonable, is a fetus or unborn child, whichever terminology you wish to use, considered a life? I do consider it to be a life, and it's not strictly based on something faith-based, like a lot of people would assume for these kind of positions. I am a Buddhist, but my position is, strictly speaking, a pragmatic one. A life is, well, as far as people concerned, a person. You are a person, you have life, you have value. And the reason I bring this up for a point in regards to why I am pro-life as compared to pro-choice is that a fetus is a life, or at least will be, given time. You have people discussing at what time an abortion is appropriate. What stage in the process does it become a person or a life, as opposed to just a collection of cells or tissue or something that is not far enough along in the process to have begun their life. And I think that you can discuss that all day, and to be honest, our understanding of this is primarily going to be based on the science behind it. I will say, from my view, the science of this since Roe v. Wade has occurred has been in favor of pro-life, showing that actual life begins much sooner and in many more ways than we initially had thought. But the reason this is vital for discussing this is, regardless of at what point it's going to be, the thing is that it is going to be. Deciding that you should cut it off before it reaches that point is where I have that contention. The comparison I'm going to make is seeds. Let's say seeds for vegetables. Seeds are not, strictly speaking, nourishment. They're not food. You can technically eat them, yes, but they are, for all intents and purposes, not actually something that you can live off of food-wise. But if you plant your vegetable seeds and you take care of them, water them, give them sun and wait, they will eventually become food. The reason I bring this up is someone having a pile of seeds and saying something to the effect of, "I can't eat these," and throwing them away. Yes, you are technically discarding something that isn't food, but it would be food. And it would be harmful in the context of not wanting to set yourself back to get rid of something that will eventually prosper. Now, following this, if you're still with me at this point, whether a unborn child or a fetus is considered a life, if it is, which I consider it to be a life, then you do not have a right to take it away. You can't kill people. Your reason for doing something in regards to, in this case, murder, is not strictly relevant except for the degrees of it. If you kill someone, it's murder. If you do it in an accidental way, it's manslaughter. If you do it in a particularly bigoted way, it is a hate crime. You have degrees, but it is not something that is seen as tolerable. It is something that is merely contextualized. A point that's often brought up in regards to abortion is the very real but uncomfortable topic of rape. That is, if you are raped and you would be conceiving a child from the rapist, that is not a one-night stand in which you didn't use protection. So that's not you making life choices that went against your better interests. That is against your will, by definition. And that's something that is entirely a perspective that you should accommodate. The alternative, however, when we bring this up, is not to say that we should be unsympathetic towards people who go through those traumatic experiences. It is to ask a question which I will tell you my answer to, of course. Does a child who is conceived through rape not have as much of a right to live as someone born under normal consensual circumstances? If there are people who were conceived via rape, would you be okay with them just disappearing? Would you, if you had learned, much to your own surprise, that you were conceived of rape, would you have wanted your own life to end? Or would you be okay with people considering not giving you a chance at life because of that? The question is the unborn child responsible for the actions of their father? They didn't choose for that to happen. And if you think it's okay to, in this case, prevent the life or kill someone whose father was a rapist purely for the fact that their father was a rapist and nothing of their own actions or their own choices, well, you're essentially committing someone to death for something outside of their control. And there are a lot of people who have been conceived this way, who have feelings on this topic of, if this was something that they considered as an option, they may not be around today. And they may have gone on to lead happy lives or do many great productive things for themselves. They, if given the opportunity, would absolutely castigate their fathers and say that they completely disavow them and that they hate them for what they've done. But they wouldn't have that opportunity unless they actually came to term and were born. Another point that's brought up in regards to abortion specifically is whether or not someone has the financial ability to care for a child. Whether or not they do or don't want to may be immaterial to whether they can afford it, whether they can give the child a happy life, things like that. And that's a very reasonable standard. The thing of note is, in response to that, is simply put, adoption. You may not have the life circumstances by your own admission to care for a child, and that's fine, especially in the context of what we mentioned of if a child was forced upon you by a sexual assault. You may not have planned for a family in the first place. So in that case, as we mentioned before, it's not the child's fault that their father is a rapist, and it's not your fault that you were attacked. So, give the child to adoption. There are plenty of people who cannot or would not have children, but they want to have a family. And so you can provide them with that opportunity. Now, to be entirely frank, there are a lot of issues with adoption as well. This is not a apologetics for that. The actual foster care system is a complete wreck and absolutely should be fixed. But we are talking about the difference between being critical of a foster care system and killing someone. I think it would be better for us to let the kid live while we sort things out instead of denying them the opportunity at a potentially fantastic life. And even if adoption wasn't an option, I want you to consider what we've discussed here as far as my position of it being a person and it being murder to kill a person. If you were to go into financial dire straits, or if you were to be in a position where you stacked up a lot of debt because of your need to care for this child, whether it's through bills, daycare, medical expenses, any given thing, it is expensive. But does your ability to live comfortably supersede someone's right to live? And that's again what we're talking about. You do not get to kill someone just because you have a risk of financial instability. If I walked up to someone on the street and decided to kill them and take their wallet, that would be considered, oh, just because you wanted to ease your financial burden doesn't mean that you get to kill someone. Well, I'd say same thing with a child. And even more so, in the sense of they are absolutely defenseless compared to someone else. You know, like if I mug a guy in the street, you know, he can run away, beat me up, shoot me. He has options. Not that you should have to encounter these options, but you do. And now put in the case of a child, they don't have the mental faculties to object. They do not have the physical capabilities to prevent it or escape. And in this case, you may be put under financial hardships. You may be put under stress. You may be put under an undue burden. But that does not give you the right to kill someone, strictly speaking. This last point I'm going to make is in regards to intellectual honesty. That is to say, a exception to these rules that I've put down as far as my position. I am pro-life, but I am not blind to unique circumstances that could absolutely change the context of what we're talking about. You could be talking about miscarriages, you could be talking about stillborn, you could be talking about children that have come from incest, you could be talking about an actual medical harm to the woman who is going to be giving birth, and you could absolutely be talking about a circumstance where there will be dire consequences for either involved if it is allowed to continue. With that in mind, even if I did have full say over how this operated, there should always be room for exceptions, or at least discussing exceptions. Because when everyone brings up this discussion for pro-life versus pro-choice, and they say a woman's right to choose, I think that is an entirely disingenuous way to frame it in the context of murder is not something that you would typically frame as a choice, but in this context it is. And it is not to say that you shouldn't have a say in the matter, but ideally it should not be a choice unless it is a particularly difficult and unique circumstance. Because that's the point that should be considered here. It isn't lines in the sand, it isn't I'm right, you're wrong, it is simply discussing goals. What is my goal when I say that I am pro-life? My goal is, if a child would live in the circumstances where the only thing preventing them from living is an abortion, then I want them to live. That's it. I think everyone should have the opportunity at life, because life is wonderful, it is beautiful, and your opportunity to achieve happiness or your dreams or what have you isn't something that should be taken away from someone for entirely frivolous reasons. I consider frivolous to be, I don't have enough money, or I don't like their father anymore, or it would be inconvenient. Keep all of these factors in mind and decide for yourself, because that is your right to choose. When other people talk about whether or not they are pro-life or pro-choice, I find it hard to discuss these things simply because people aren't talking about their goals, they're talking about why the other side is hypocrites. They're only talking about why the other side is wrong and not why they feel the way they do. It's always, this thing is sacred and they're trying to take it away. Or this thing is immoral and they believe this and that and this thing. It's always entirely an inflammatory subject, when the best way to get your point across is say, what do you want out of this? I would assume, if I'm being charitable, that the pro-choice side wants to ensure that a woman has options. That they have, by their own terminology, the right to choose whether or not this is something of a responsibility that they want to take on, and they shouldn't be forced to go through with it if they don't want to. And that's the thing. Under ideal circumstances, nobody would be forced to go under anything that they don't want to. But there are certain realities that you have to face. Your actions have consequences. That is to say, your choices specifically have consequences. And when you're saying something to the effect of, I shouldn't be forced to do something that I haven't chosen, I want you to keep that in mind for the concept of empathy for the person who is growing inside of you. They are also a person. They may not have the cognitive faculties yet. They may not even be able to conceive of anything in a sort of mental or cognitive sense at all. But they will be. And if you think it is unfair to go through something that is beyond your ability to choose, I feel like they would be the same way. You can relate on that. If you feel in particular any way about this, as far as what you've done in your life and what you want to do with your life, I want you to consider the notion that if you were pushing for what you're pushing, as in you want people to be able to have that freedom, consider, well, it's a bit hyperbolic, but I'll be straightforward with you. What if your parents wanted to have an abortion? You wouldn't be able to object to it, you wouldn't have any thoughts on it, you would have no strong feelings one way or the other because you, depending on your spiritual beliefs, you wouldn't exist. You wouldn't have even begun to think about existing. Do you mind losing out on those experiences? Any happiness or joy that your life may have had, any happiness that you brought other people, any changes that you may have made for the better for your family, your friends, your community, any accomplishments that you've ever made at all. Are you comfortable with saying all of those should be absolutely removed? My consciousness, my history, my life, my happiness, entirely for the sake of one individual. And this individual is your mother, of course, and you may care for them dearly and you may have wanted the best for them. And if you feel specifically that, yes, you would have absolutely taken away everything you've ever enjoyed just so they wouldn't have to go through raising you, that's okay if you think that way. But that is not a mindset that you should force onto other people who want to live and who want to exist. And if you feel differently than that, that's okay. That's the thing I want to convey. As much as I present myself as knowledgeable on a lot of things, I haven't given birth, you may have guessed. I was a child once, believe it or not, and I have opinions on the matter, and I want to hear what other people have to say on it, strictly because it's better to talk about why you think this way than to castigate you for things you may never have thought or said. That's all that I have for today. If you want to see more, expect some more videos in the relatively near future. I'll probably be making a few more of these videos going forward now that I'm back in the swing of things. Feel free to follow me on Twitter. I'm most active there. Expect a particularly schizophrenic blend of takes regarding dumb political things, memes, video games. It's a total fucking mess, but then again, so is all of Twitter right now. I'll see you next time.